in order to test for the use case, remember, in here, this is a contract, right? It's an interface. We don't test them. The entities is a blueprint as well, so we don't need to test this. The places that have actual implementations in the domain layer would be the use cases, right? So we have to write tests for each use case, right? So we can go in here and create a test folder, test, right? Inside of the tests, we can create a new direct file. Now we have to follow the same path for this. Why? So that we can easily find our tests. So if we're testing for create user, we can go ahead and copy its path. Let me find that use case create user. We can copy its path. Let's copy from the lib source. We can remove the lib as well. So dart file. We can paste what we've copied. Create user test. Right. So if our class was if our module was create user, we simply add underscore test at the end of it, right? So that's how it goes. That is the convention. We want to start from the source, not from the lib. So we go and create that, right? So we have our file, right? So there's an easier way to do this, right? You can install a package known as Dart test. Let me see plugins. We can see Dart test, this one. All right, so you can simply just right click on your file and then say create new test file or something like that. Create a new Dart test file with the same path in mind. So let's go ahead and test that. I'm going to delete the source and then go ahead and say, no, I have to do that here. New test file. And we can say create user. And it will follow the same path and create this for us. So let's go ahead and delete this. So now you have to understand why we're testing and what exactly we're doing in this so-called test. Alright, so why are we testing? Oh my days, I'm so sorry guys, I forgot about this. Font is small. Then make that 16. I think that's overkill, but whatever. Right, so what are we testing and why? Right, so in this case we're testing this use case, right? This is so big. Alright, so the reason why we actually want to test this is because we want to make sure that this functionality will function the way we want it to. It will carry out the assignment that we're giving to it as expected. Alright? So each test should focus. So the reason why we call these unit tests, so currently what we're doing is called the unit test, is because it focuses on a small section of your code, a small piece of it, right? A unit. So for example, this class is a unit. So when I say unit, I'm referring to the class that contains whatever functionality we're testing. Alright, so inside of this class, we have functionalities. These functionalities are the methods, the functions, alright? So we're going to be testing the functions inside of a unit. Alright, so inside of this class, we have several. If we had even more than one function, we'd have to write tests each of the functions to make sure that each function carries out the whatever we ask it to carry out. We can test if it returns what we want it to return. We can test if it accepts what we want it to accept. We can test the process that it takes in order to do that. Alright, so this will prevent any bugs. Alright, it will basically catch almost every bug, right? The only bugs you might encounter might be widget tests, widget bugs, Flutter UI bugs if you don't write unit tests, if you don't write widget tests, that is rather. So basically, the unit tests will be like a safety net for us, right, and for our code basically. So telling it this is how I want you to function. If it's not going to function like that in every case, please throw an error for me now that I'm running a test. Right, so let's go ahead and do that. So inside of our create user test, what is the first thing we have to know? So first things first, when you're testing a unit, when I say unit, I mean a class. When you're testing a class, we have to first of all ask 3 questions. The first question is, what does the class depend on? When you ask this question, we're basically saying, what does this class take in its constructors? Right, so if we're going to test this class, then we're basically going to be initializing this class. So class, we initialize class name, we initialize that class. But if it takes anything in the constructor, it depends on that thingy, right? It means that that class depends on that thing. And then the next question we have to ask is, how can we create a fake version of the dependency? So basically, for example, if our class is depending on an HTTP library, right, we don't want to use the real HTTP library. Why? The reason for this is because we want that dependency, we want to be able to control that dependency, right? So for example, let me give you an example. For example, with HTTP, we can do http.get request, we can send a get request, right? When we send that get request, right, what happens? This will go talk to the server gives it back a response, it saves that response, and it brings it back to us. And now we're writing a test. We want to make sure that whenever we call the HTTP library, that it returns something to us, right? But in order to know and make sure that it returns something to us, we have to call HTTP get in our test. But this is a test, right? So if we go ahead and use the raw HTTP library, that will actually will want to make a true call to a server somewhere and then return you its response. Now we don't have control over that, we can't stop it. But when we create a fake version of the HTTP library, then we can then have control over what it returns, right? And we can also control who it talks to. We want to make sure it doesn't talk to any server, that it's only talking to us, right? Because we don't want to involve any real world dependencies. We don't want to invoke any real world, any real external services in our cases. Right? We don't want to do anything with the real implementations of these things, because then we don't have control over them. And that's where the final question comes in. How do we control what are dependencies